Welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger here in Aotearoa. Now, this week, this is a revisit episode. I enjoy doing these because I, like you, wonder, whatever happened to ... Well, I last interviewed Hamish in 2021 in episode number 50, which was called An Investor with Military Precision. At that time, he was 27 years old and today he is 31. Now, by all means, go back and re-listen to that episode, but I'll also give you a very brief recap now. Back in 2018, aged just 24, Hamish had saved up a $125,000 deposit and he had bought a $379,000 house in Palmerston North. He didn't accept that home ownership was out of his league, and he achieved his goal through 7 years of planning and deliberate effort because, at a young age, he had noticed that too many people fail to plan for something that they want, but they still expect it to happen. Not so with him. His ability to save began young when he got a job at McDonald's while he was still at school, and that handy saving skill came with him when he joined the army straight out of school in 2012. And he continues to serve in the New Zealand military today, working around New Zealand and also around the world. His starting wage was just $34,000 a year, but his outgoings were low due to living cheaply in barracks. And on the advice of his parents, he immediately signed up to KiwiSaver and paid 4% into his fund, which was matched by the government. When we spoke in 2021, his skill set and rank had increased, and he was earning just over $70,000 a year gross, plus additional daily allowances when he is deployed overseas. Another thing his parents did as he exited the family home was to sit him down with a financial advisor to talk about investing. Having had a teacher at school who also talked about investing, he was not completely new to the concept of investing, and he readily listened to their advice. And when he first joined the army, another financial advisor came in to speak with his intake about the basics of good money management, and again he listened intently, showing you that teaching young people about money does work. He said his family were average income earners who were good at saving, and they stayed disciplined with their money, living on less than they made, and they modelled those behaviours to Hamish. Back then, and to this day, he is able to regularly speak to his parents about money. So all those parents listening to this, Hamish is an example that talking to your tamariki about money helps them become adults who manage money well. From day one at work, aged just 18, he set the goal to buy a house. So with every paycheck, he saved as much as possible, which at that stage was about $500 a fortnight, plus contributions to his KiwiSaver. He also built up $1,000 in cash in the bank as an emergency fund. And at the time we spoke, he kept a $2,000 emergency fund. Now, every time he got a pay rise or extra money, he didn't suffer from lifestyle creep. Instead, he upped the amount he saved. It took him almost 7 years of methodical budgeting and good habits to save up that $125,000 or 30% house deposit to buy a $379,000 house in Palmerston North with a mortgage of $254,000. He drained his KiwiSaver and his savings to do it. And when we spoke in February of 2021, his mortgage was down to $220,000 and his goal was to own it outright by 2030, where he'll be aged 36. His home became a rental property when the military moved him out of town about 18 months later, and he charged his tenants rent of $450 per week and began putting the rent up a little each year. He'd calculated that he was cash flow positive by a mere $5 a fortnight after all expenses. And his intention was to make additional mortgage payments from his take-home pay to pay his house off faster, plus build a share portfolio alongside it, which would give him both a diversified portfolio, meaning he was not just all in on housing, and income. When we spoke, he had about $20,000 invested, with a third of his money in managed funds and 2/3 in individual shares, which was both risky and had high fees. It will be interesting to hear today if his investment strategy has changed. His KiwiSaver balance was slowly building itself back up, but he was paying an eye-wateringly high fee of 1.48%, and the balance was just $16,500. Having drained it down to $1,000, he had to start over. Back in 2021, when we spoke, Hamish was a saver, not a spender. He was driving around in his trusty Corolla and working hard at his day job. He was living a very contented life while he built up his net worth in a way that he could have autonomy over his own time in the future. So I, like you, I'm keen to hear what has changed for him today. Remember too that he created and still does his own podcast called The Kiwi House Deposit, and he continues to interview others about their first home purchases. Now, before I really crack into it, I've just got a quick message from today's sponsor. I'm a massive fan of creating multiple sources of income because I believe it makes you more financially resilient. However, you need to be sure that extra hours spent working on a side hustle translate into actual money in your pocket. PocketSmith helps manage secondary income from a side hustle by integrating various financial accounts, providing customizable budgeting and cash flow forecasts, and offering a detailed dashboard unique to each side hustle for transaction management and net worth tracking. If you want to supercharge your finances with PocketSmith, have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. We picked up the phone for our kōrero in May of 2025, and by this time, Hamish has had his home for almost 7 years. During this time, he has lived in it for a total of just 18 months and has then either lived in barracks on base, travelled with the military overseas for many months at a time, or rented in the town that he found himself in. In 2022, after a 4-month stint overseas with work, he was able to stay on the other side of the world and join his parents and 2 siblings for a month-long family holiday. Now, this was something that his parents had always wanted to do. A family holiday was something they had always talked about, but while their kids were still at home, they never had the sort of money to do such a trip. Well, his parents were in the process of retiring. They had the money now and were finally in a position to take their 3 adult children on a brilliant family holiday, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime trip which sounded awesome. He returned to Aotearoa and to his girlfriend Sophie, who he had just started seeing before he left and who he'd stayed in touch with during the 5 months that he was away. She lived in the Manawa too and worked in the area of advertising and graphic design. He got back to Palmerston North and he got stuck into his work. Because his house was rented out and the chances he would be moved again were really high, as a short-term stopgap, he was actually renting a room in the house of a friend, paying just $120 a week in total, which included food, power, and the internet. And he explained that during 2023 and 2024, things got pretty hectic. A new position at work meant a move to Upper Hutt, where he was living cheaply in barracks and still able to return to his $120 a week flat on the weekends so he could visit his girlfriend. And I was interested to know what living cheaply in barracks actually cost. He said it was about $50 a fortnight, plus an extra $12 per day for 3 meals. He said it served its purpose, but described it as feeling like you are living at a boarding school while also working full-time. But it was the right place for Hamish though, because in 2023, he had 2 international deployments, which meant it didn't make a whole lot of sense to commit to renting somewhere. In 2023, he bounced between living in barracks during his working week to his girlfriend's place on the weekend, paying her $40 a week when he did, and at the end of 2023, they actually got engaged and the combining of their lives really began in earnest. Now, during the 7 years he has owned his property, apart from living in it himself, he has had 4 different groups of tenants. He said that the first 2 were not the best, but the second were really good. He had taken out a $5,000 interest-free loan for insulation, which had a date for which it had to be paid back. Plus, he had a $40,000 part of his mortgage on a floating rate. He said he made additional payments to both of these debts until they were gone, and then he upped the payments on the larger 3.6% fixed rate principal and interest mortgage loan that he had. His minimum payment is $500 a fortnight, but he pays $680 instead, so that he can make more of a dent on his debt. and this fixed rate expires soon. Today, he still owes $170,000 on his mortgage, and the house is valued at about $530,000, giving him equity of about $360,000. He now charges $570 a week rent, which is $29,640 per year. And he explained that this works out at $2,470 per calendar month. All of this rent, plus some of his take-home pay, goes back out the door in the form of outgoings. He pays about $368 per month for a property manager, GST, and an inspection fee, he said, and his monthly mortgage payment is $1,360. He pays insurance of $125 a month and rates of $246 a month. He sets aside $422 for tax on his rental income each month, plus he puts aside an additional $100 a month for maintenance. His total monthly rent is about $2,470 and his outgoings are $2,621, and he covers the monthly $151 shortfall from his wages. Now, his girlfriend had also owned real estate over the years. Her parents were in the building trade, meaning that she bought, fixed up and sold 3 houses over the years, but when they met, she was actually flashing herself. 2024 was a big year for this couple as they got married a few months into the year. Plus, they had their first child mid-year and they moved down to Wellington for his work, renting a well-insulated, well-maintained and warm army house for $435 a week, which is cheap for the area they were in, Hamish said. And they are still living in this house today. Now, of course, me being me, I had to ask what a wedding costs these days. Because they had a lot going on, he said they asked themselves how they could achieve the outcome they wanted, which was each marrying the love of their life with the least amount of fuss and cost. So they more or less eloped in the town they were in and had a party early in 2025. And all up, their wedding and the party they held for 50 people at a later date cost about $8,000, with $2,800 of that cost being their wedding rings. They paid for a photographer and to have Sophie's makeup done, plus flowers for the wedding day. Their wedding cake was delicious and it actually came from New World. They brought in food that came from a local restaurant and was served at their free venue, which was the Mess at the Army Base, a very nice building, he said. And their drinks bill was low due to the discounted rate, plus there was the cost of the marriage license and the wedding certificate. Now, a fun fact is that my husband Johnny and I eloped 23 years ago while we were on holiday overseas, and our delicious wedding cake also came from a local supermarket. So it's not what you spend or who you invite, it's who you marry that matters. Now, I just want to jump back a few years because Hamish made a financial move before he met Sophie that he and now they are still feeling the impact of today. Now, although he had a plan for his Palmerston North property, the house he bought to live in, that later became a rental property, and that was to pay it off in full, well, he decided to take a different path in 2021 by buying another rental property, this time in a town miles away from where he lived, Christchurch. Now, as soon as he mentioned this, I knew what was coming, as I've heard this scenario now more times than I can count. He was single, and he said that at that time he was anti-property investing as a business because he said he knew the numbers didn't make sense. But basically he thought, I'm only 27 years old. I'll give it a try myself before I talk down on it. And as we spoke, I knew that he had fallen for the slick marketing campaign of a residential rental company who promised that rental properties were the no-fail path to riches. And it sounded like he unfortunately had to go all in to learn otherwise. Now, hopefully by listening to this, you won't have to learn it for yourself. He paid about $525,000 for a 2-bedroom townhouse. He had zero deposit, which felt like a pro instead of a con, because he didn't have to put any money into the deal, just sign himself up to a $525,000 mortgage instead, which in hindsight was a huge mistake, he said. He bought a house off the plans, which is the way these companies do it, which he was told would take 6 months to build, but ended up taking a year to build before it was completed in 2022, with tenants paying $420 a week in rent. Over the last 2+ years, tenants have changed a few times, and the current rent is $490 a week. Now, I'm not even going to bother to mention the residential property investor company, but he said they were pretty average at communication, plus it tied him into using their property managers, paying their 9% fee. Currently, 3 and a bit years in, he has never earned enough in rent to cover the outgoings of the property. And that is not the tenant's fault. Landlords can't keep tapping them for higher rent when their business model just doesn't stack up. It's the developers, yet again, overpromising and under-delivering rental housing as a great investment. The annoying thing is that Hamish said he always knew this type of investment was not for him, but thought he would see if he could prove himself wrong. But he couldn't, and now he's stuck with it. His $535,000 mortgage was chopped up into 3 different mortgages, one of which is interest only, another mistake, while the other 2 are principal and interest debts. He is topping up the mortgage to the tune of $9,000 a year. Over the 3 years it's been completed, he has put an additional $27,000 into it, on top of all the rental income, he said. Why would he sign up to a property that he had his doubts about and was negatively geared? How could he not do the math and work out that the rental income was not enough to cover the debts that his mortgage broker sold him? How did he get sucked in when he said he knew better? The company he signed up with guaranteed 2 years of rental income, meaning that if you can't find a tenant, they will cover the rent, so that gave him peace of mind. Also, house prices were going up at that time, right in the midst of COVID, and FOMO was real. He said that everyone lost their mind, including him. Interest rates were low, most started with a 3, and his intention was to lock in a low rate. But what happened was that the build, which was meant to take just 6 months, dragged on for 12, and in that time interest rates started to rise, meaning that by the time he was ready to take on the mortgage, his interest rate now had a 5 at the front. No amount of government rule changes that favour property investors was going to help him out of this, but to her immense credit, his partner and now wife could. As I mentioned, she had bought, fixed up and sold a number of properties and was sitting on about $350,000 of cash. When they married, they combined their finances 100% and they paid the mortgage on what is now their Christchurch rental property down with this money. Finally, with their mortgage payments making more of an impact, the remaining mortgage is now $165,000. But of course, most rental investors in New Zealand, they don't do it for the rental returns. They simply can't when they never get to keep a single dollar of the rent because they have so much debt against it, but they do it for the tax-free capital gains instead, which they will receive when they sell. So, 3+ years into ownership, they must be sitting pretty with a rise in value of the home plus significant equity, thanks only to them. Well, no. The price has flatlined and has not gone up in value at all, he said. And of course, that is a guess as well, because you only know the price of your home once you find someone to buy it off you. It may well be that it's gone down in value. Hamish said that if he was to speak honestly, he said that the crazy fascination that New Zealand has for housing more or less sold the house for the company that he dealt with, constantly hearing that buying houses is the way to get rich, and slick sales techniques gave him house fever, he said. And the irony was, he said that his now wife sold a house at the peak in 2021 and did very well out of it, and right when she was selling, he was buying at that same peak, and today the value has gone nowhere. But with all that being said, he made a mistake young and he has learned a lesson from it. So what is the moral of this story? If a property investment company is selling you an expensive course or a seminar, or in Hamish's case, a house, to teach you how to make money out of property, run a mile. Don't be fooled by fancy websites, magazines, marketing, sponsorship, or overly generous math. There are a lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to these types of investments, and because property has so many moving parts, it's really hard to see how your investment may play out. I've talked to so many people who have signed up to one of these companies who now regret doing so, but are questioning just how many years they need to hang on in there to make their investment actually turn a profit. So, now that he's owned it a number of years, what is the plan with this terribly performing investment property that has not gone up in value and cost them money to own? Well, they plan to hold on to it for now, lock in an interest rate when it renews again, top up the mortgage when required, and consider selling it at a future date in the hope that the value rises. Now, not that he asked, but what would I do if I woke up in their shoes? I'd sell it. I'd take my $370,000 of equity and invest it in an asset that actually makes money over time, because clearly this ain't it. The only person winning in this deal sounds like the property manager, and the tenants also, because they live in a lovely new build with fixed outgoings and no mortgage and property outgoings. Renting absolutely has its perks, and don't let people tell you otherwise. If someone is saying to you renting is dead money, well, chances are they're trying to sell your house. So therefore, currently, this whānau of 3 has 2 homes, neither of which they actually live in, both of which have mortgages, meaning neither property give them an income to cover the rent on the property that they currently rent and live in. Which begs the question, for this couple, what is the purpose of owning rental properties? His wife is now a full-time mother, working a little remotely from home as and when she can, while he works full-time. It is very likely that they will be moved somewhere else later in the year, as is normal when you work for the military. And when they know that next location, they will consider selling both of their properties, at this stage taking a loss from the Christchurch house, but a gain from the Palmerston North house, for a total, they are hoping, of about $720,000 cash after the mortgages are paid, and buying a family home. But that's all a best guess at this stage. They are currently saving up cash to put towards this next home, which would lessen the size of their mortgage. Both great savers, they already have about $75,000 in savings, and they are budgeting on spending about $850,000 on a home somewhere. The missing piece of the puzzle is where somewhere will be. Now, Hamish's wife is a great catch. She was on her own property journey prior to meeting him, banking $350,000 of gains from a number of property deals that she did in her 20s. So how did he and his wife get on the same page with money to reach a point that they share their finances? Hamish listed off a number of milestones that were important for both of them to go through prior to fully committing to a long-term relationship, and I love the thoughtful, mindful and respectful way that they went about their relationship from early on. He said that they had jumped into past relationships without thinking things through, but they wanted this one to be different. When they started dating, they wrote down what they wanted their relationship to be like, and they discussed how they might talk about different topics and their behavioural expectations from each other. Now, part of this included talking about money and financial goals. He said that these discussions were very insightful, and they took it a step further by having a few counselling sessions about how to work together before they got married. Now, I reckon that a few divorces could be avoided if people took the time to do this. The second notable milestone was that they talked about money and what each other had invested in, were invested in, and were considering investing in. They talked about how her family leaned more towards property as an investment, and he shared his knowledge of his parents investing outside of property. They talked about share investing and specifically ETF investing. Their third milestone before they got married was that given all they had learned about each other's personal financial situations, they talked to a lawyer about whether signing a relationship property agreement was necessary or not. Once they had fully noted down their individual net worths, they actually realised that they were pretty much at exactly the same financial position as the other. So based on that, their lawyer advised them that given they were 50-50, there was no benefit to creating a legal agreement. So as a result, this happily married and committed couple who are parents to one gorgeous child, they decided that they are on the same team in all aspects from here on in. Everything they do is for the good of each other and themselves. So with that unity in mind, any decision to be made about any assets they own, no matter who created it in the first place, they will make a joint decision on what happens with it. Hamish gave me a breakdown of the investments and savings that they now have. other than their 2 rental houses, which by my math have a combined equity of about $720,000. Her KiwiSaver is with low-fee provider Simplicity and a high-growth fund with a balance of $53,000. She had started work in New Zealand, but then she left for Australia, and when she came back home to buy a house, she only had about $2,000 to $3,000 in KiwiSaver, so she didn't drain her account. Instead, she brought her $8,000 of Australian superannuation over into her KiwiSaver account, and that is why she has a decent balance today, and why I'm not a fan of people draining their retirement accounts to buy a house. Sophie had managed to grow her retirement fund and buy a house. Hamish's KiwiSaver is with Kura in an aggressive fund with a balance of $56,000. Now, this is a higher fee, actively managed fund that you can stock pick within, which to me is a concern. Their website said this fund has a historical return of just 7.7%, which is low, given their intention is to aim for growth much higher than the share market average. You pay more for an actively managed KiwiSaver fund, but that does not guarantee the high returns that they hope for. Given she is a stay-at-home mum on reduced working hours for a time, they are paying 4% from his wages into his KiwiSaver fund with an employer match and making voluntary contributions of just 2% of their take-home pay into hers. This is so good to see that her retirement savings are not missing out entirely just because she is parenting, but it's something to keep an eye on if she stays out of the workforce for a long time. I like to see each person making meaningful contributions into their retirement funds so that when you each get to 65 years old, you each have a big nest egg awaiting you. Using investment provider Sharesies, they now have a total balance, at the time we spoke, of about $90,000 invested. The biggest chunk is in the smart S&P 500, with smaller amounts in the NZ50 and Australian 20. They've since ceased making new deposits into these funds, choosing instead just the smart Total World Fund. When they went down to one income, they reduced this amount down to just $60 a week until things settled down. Sharesies also charge a high fee to invest with them, so that is something to keep an eye on as well, I suspect. They also have a small one-off investment in the Kernel Global 100 Fund, so they are clearly having a bit of a hunt around for a provider to use long-term, which in many ways is good because as users of each platform, they can compare fees and performance to other providers offering similar funds. They keep a $24,000 emergency fund, $4,000 of which is in a high-interest accessible account, and $20,000 in a term deposit, trying to earn a fraction more interest. Plus, they keep money in their daily bank accounts to cover just their normal outgoings. Now, if I understood him correctly, in addition to their $90,000 of investments, they also have $75,000 in cash in the bank, earning 3% interest, which is waiting to be put towards a future home later in the year, all going to plan. Now, I'm not sure if they have run the math themselves, but on paper, their net worth is a fraction over $1 million. So, aged just 31, if this young couple were to liquidate all that they had and pay off all debt, they are net worth millionaires, which is an incredible achievement, absolutely amazing. Together, they have automated their bank accounts, listing out all of their bills to a yearly amount and then breaking them down into 26 fortnightly paydays, so they know to the best of their ability how much money from each pay will go towards bills and what they can put aside into savings and investments. Hamish's pay goes up 1 to 2% each year, and he is currently earning $92,000 gross annually. Sophie was on paid parental leave for 6 months, and when that ended, she started receiving a Best Start payment of just $70 a week for 6 months. And once this ends, he thinks they might be eligible for a Working for Families payment of some sort. The government is always mucking around with these types of payments, but he said to you to go looking for them and apply via the IRD website if you think you might be eligible. She is parenting full-time and trying to fit some paid graphic design work around this when she can, making it difficult to say what she is actually earning each week at the moment. They reckon it's perhaps about $250 a week, including that payment. They would love to have a second child, but timing is important. If she doesn't return to work between children, she may not qualify for any paid parental leave, which will reduce their household income. But returning to work might mean having to pay for childcare, so it's a bit of a catch-22. He said that to qualify for paid parental leave, Sophie will need to have worked for 10 hours per week for 6 months to qualify for the minimum. And they are both looking at her work options and government entitlements to help them plan their next steps. Which might sound calculating, but with the cost of life these days, this really is what you need to be doing if you want to guarantee a steady income while at home with a baby. So again, they encourage you to research this sort of stuff too. But regardless of whether she earns or receives any income or not, any money coming into their whānau, no matter who earned it, comes into their joint account and is theirs to manage together. Both are doing their best, whether paid or unpaid, to support their family. Bringing their finances together wasn't difficult to do, he said, not with internet banking making it so easy to set up and adjust. The main thing they had to discuss and settle on was reaching agreement on the structure of their bank accounts. Both had always managed their accounts the way they had, and now they have each had to adjust to a new system, and they're both getting used to that. But once a month, they sit down and they work out how it's all going and are open to changing anything that is not quite working. Hamish said that because they have had conversations about money so early in their relationship, they now just get on with it and have very open kōrero. Now, before I wrap up, I just have another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try Pocketsmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Well, what a couple. I didn't get to speak with Sophie, but I didn't have to in order to form the impression that these two have built a marriage based on communication and respect, where each of them have equal say. So thank you both for everything you shared with me for this podcast. Now, having spoken with Hamish before he even knew Sophie, it was really nice to see him combine his life with someone else and be so much happier for it. Given their relationship is so strong, they now have 2 high IQs on the case when it comes to future investing. Next time one of them comes up with an investment plan that looks sketchy, they now have someone else to talk it through with, and that's going to save them a fortune in the long run, I suspect. Getting out of both rentals and using all of that money towards buying a single property they live in, it makes sense at this time in their lives, but I still think, and I think Hamish can see, that they have to be careful here as they will still be 90% invested in property. The key to their financial future is owning their home outright and then investing in share market assets such as their KiwiSavers and an enormous global ETF fund as hard as they can afford to, while also living an awesome life with their growing whānau, because that has a greater ability to give them an income than rental investing ever could. They are playing the long game now with beginning to invest in something other than housing. Their ETF investing is already being refined down to just a total world fund, ETF, and I suspect that over the next year or two, as they watch the performance of that one giant fund, their other investments will fall into line and they will move away from stock picking and country picking. But time will tell. Now, I suggest that they and you search for J.L. Collins, author of The Simple Path to Wealth, in your podcast app for more information on this. Now, Sophie bought and sold houses in her 20s to flip them and make money, and she did make some. Hamish bought a house to live in, but he got moved elsewhere and became a landlord instead. While that has proved to be a more sound investment, his foray into Canterbury has been the exact opposite. And it makes me ask a question. What is the point of owning a house? To me, it's to provide your whānau with a home, and all their housing efforts, I think, will eventually pay off and give them a home of their own. But they have a few decisions to make as to exactly when that might be. There are just so many variables at play when it comes to selling their 2 houses, but I do think it's safe to say Hamish did manage to teach himself a money lesson young in life. And now that they are both aged just 31, they do have time to financially recover from it. He said they spend a lot of time talking about their options and looking ahead. They know that if they can be mortgage-free, they have the ability to invest $1,400 a fortnight into their ETF fund in KiwiSaver. That's $100 a day, he said. Keeping this goal in mind, doing this simple math, and talking things through, it just gives them options, and I'd love to see them use their take-home pay to build wealth instead of using it to borrow money. Now, before I go, just another reminder that Hamish has diligently created the Kiwi House Deposit podcast for many years now. He is always on the lookout for people who are buying or have bought their very first home who are willing to share how they did it. Creating this podcast is a hobby of his, and he wants to break down the thinking that houses are unaffordable and that with time and determination, you can achieve home ownership if that is what you really want. Now, you can contact him via email at hamishmsummers@gmail.com if you think you might be interested in chatting. The people he's interviewed have helped shape his thinking because each of them say something that sticks with him and makes an impact. And I hope that by me sharing his and Sophie's story today, well, they have mentioned a few things that have got you thinking as well. So thanks again to the both of you. So that is all from me this week. If you want to get in touch, you know you can find me at thehappysaver.com. And please do share my podcast and blog with your friends. It is the best way that I can help other people learn something new about money. And finally, you know I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.